This is CTO Insights, a podcast on engineering leadership. I'm Katarina, your host, and I will be bringing you insights from senior engineering leaders and experts on creating a culture of high performance. In this episode, I had the pleasure to host JB Rainsberger, business and software coach, helping companies profit sooner from their software projects while helping individuals navigate the complex world of work. His approach is all about less stress and more energy to bring to the profit producing and profit promoting parts of the job. The notion of programming is the easy part comes again as a focal point of the discussion. So we're digging further into what are the actual difficult parts of work. JB explains how whenever he's coaching teams, the challenges they share are almost always related to people relations and rarely to code and architecture. We explore common causes of delays and stressful work environment, together with his insights on how to improve delivery and overall performance by adjusting the working habits on individual level. Very insightful conversation, taking a different angle than usual and empowering individuals to make their work more joyful and productive, regardless of the general conditions of the company. This episode is brought to you by Adiva, a global talent network that I founded back in 2014 that connects the world's best companies with the world's best tech talent. At Adiva, we provide access to a global network of top-tier tech and product talent ready to hit the ground running. With the ability to introduce a candidate within 24 hours and an exceptional 98% success rate on trial engagements, Adiva offers the flexibility for companies to scale their teams up or down as needed. If you're looking to expand your team, drive momentum in new projects, or need to backfill a role, Adiva might just be the solution you need. Visit adivait.com to get started. JB, welcome. Thank you for accepting my invite to join me today.
No, thanks very much for having me.
I want to start with one controversial statement, just because I think that it will kind of annoy many developers and engineers. You say that programming is the easy part, and I
Right.
can totally see where you come from. But let's explore that a bit. Why is it easy when everyone feels like it's the most difficult thing that you can learn and to grow in your career?
Right. So let me be very clear about what I mean by this. So I before all the travel restrictions started a few years ago, I was wandering around Central Europe doing a talk called "Programming is the Easy Part." Part of the idea behind that talk was to have a bit of a provocative title, but really to emphasize that the aspects of being a professional software developer that went beyond writing code. What it was like to interact with people in groups, trying to help groups turn into teams. Difficulties in planning work when, for the most part, we have no idea how long it's going to take us to do anything. And yet we still have all these people who are standing there with their arms crossed, tapping their toes, impatiently waiting for us to be done. Um, and it really did seem like a lot of programmers were coming to me asking me questions about the programming aspect of their work. And yet every time we sat down to start discussing what was going on for them, when I would suggest something simple or when we would try to do something that seemed relatively straightforward to me, the obstacles that they kept mentioning were obstacles related to people and policies and not code. And that was sort of part of where I came up with this idea of framing it as programming is the easy part. I think that's genuinely true. Like I said in my talk, I can take here are a handful of techniques that you can practice. Take like 3 to 7 years, do them every single day. You pretty much have them mastered. Everything is fine. Now I know the basics of how to write software. I can do it relatively easily if only all these annoying people would get out of my way. And that's where the fun starts, right? The idea was really to emphasize that most of the problems that you have with developing software in a professional context relates to people and the organization. and not your daily battle with the machine. Your daily battle with this machine is still a battle, but it's relatively easy compared to dealing with these strange, delightful bags of meat. So when I say that it's the easy part, I mean it's easy in comparison. It's not easy, but it is certainly easy compared to why won't the architect just let us do the simple thing, or why do we have to try to meet this completely made up deadline? For me, that's what makes programming the easy part. And you know it's the easy part because it's the part you retreat to. When you, as a programmer, struggle with people, one of the easiest things to do is retreat to writing code because at least the computer will do what I tell it to do. Now, that might be changing as computers become more complicated, but for the most part, the computer does what I told it to do. And that's part of what makes it, relatively speaking, the easy
I
part.
keep nodding because this resonates 100%. So talking about, I want to explore like a traditional software team or a traditional company that is doing agile today. What are they doing that might be preventing them from delivering the most value or from delivering features fast? What are some examples of companies that you've been working with, like common patterns that you see happening that need to be addressed?
Well, the first thing is I have to chuckle a little bit at the idea of a traditional team doing agile things. That's not a sentence that would have come out of our mouths 25 years ago. And you know, when you say agile things, I kind of want to get into the question of what kind of agile are you talking about? I don't actually want to ask you that question, but that's actually where I tend to start with clients because there's such confusion out there about what agile means and what they're really trying to do. And I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there in this discussion. I would rather go there with clients because everyone's different and the the variation in understanding is really interesting from person to person. So I think one of the underlying things, one of the sort of overall mistakes is perhaps too harsh. But one of the recurring patterns I see is groups that are struggling to understand why they want to use agile ideas in the first place. I know that's such a foundational thing and it sounds like consultant nonsense, but it really is true that when I dig into what it is exactly that they're trying to do, they often don't know why. They get stuck at what I think of as kind of an advanced beginner level of practice where they've read some things in books and they've got excited about how those things can help them. I remember because that's what it was like for me. When I read Extreme Programming Installed nearly 25 years ago, I got really excited at the idea of let's figure out all the things that we should stop wasting our time doing and just stop doing them. And just imagine what we could do with the other time available. And that was even before I got into any of the practices, test-driven development or weekly planning or any of those kinds of things. Just the idea that I see all these people around me wasting time doing things just because another person told them they're supposed to. They don't really provide any value otherwise. They don't really help us. And we could just like not do them. That felt exciting to me. So I understand people, they read these things in books. Maybe they've read the Scrum Guide. Maybe they've read something about personal Kanban. And they've got really excited and they think, these things can probably help us. Let's try them. And then they try them. So let's try doing test-driven development. And everybody in their group yawns. Or let's try weekly planning. And then they find out that every week it's the same story over and over again. And when they say that they can't do this much stuff in a week, everybody says, well, you need to do it. Or they try having retrospectives and it's just the same complaints coming up over and over again every week. And after, I don't know, a few months of trying to do this, I can imagine groups being disillusioned. And you've got some people who give up and some people who make the junior manager mistake of saying, well, maybe we need to do more of it. Maybe we need to do more test-driven development. Maybe we need to do more retrospectives. We need to do them better. We need to read more books about how to do this. And maybe the technique is the problem. And they've lost sight of what it is exactly that they're trying to do by adopting these techniques. Or they don't have a strategy. What they have is a few tricks that they've read in books that they think they might be able to do, that they think might be helpful, and they just try doing them. And the system, the people, the policies, the organization push back, and they don't know what to do. And then they get stuck in this advanced beginner stage where they never really get a chance to get good at the techniques that they're learning because they're constantly told not to do it. They never get a chance to see benefits from those techniques because the system and the people are pushing back, so they're not seeing the benefits that the book told them they're supposed to get. And the only trick they have left is try harder. Well, the only two tricks left are try harder and give up. So they try harder until they can't try harder any longer, then they give up. And nothing ever happens. Nothing ever changes. And so that's usually the point at which they then come crying to me. And, the best I can do is comfort them, say, I understand. I've been where you are now. I remember what that felt like. That's horrible. And then I can start to engage them in the conversation. Well, what exactly are you trying to improve? What exactly are you trying to, what did you want to have happen when you tried to do this? What problems are you trying to solve? What improvements are you trying to make? How do you want the world to be different? And that's then when we can really do what these books were eventually suggesting, which is if you get good at some of these techniques, then you'll have sharper knives in your kitchen. When it comes time to try to make a meal, you'll do a better job. But the hard part is figuring out what to cook. The hard part is figuring out which problems are we really trying to solve? What are we really trying to improve? What's really possible with these people in this situation right now? And that's the hard part. That's the part that then, we used to talk about in the old days of extreme programming, that extreme programming isn't these 12 or 13, however you want to count them, practices. It's what you do once you've mastered those practices. Once you get good at doing those things, how do you behave? What kinds of things do you try to do? And it's very hard for these folks to get to that stage because when they try to practice any of these techniques, they are already meeting resistance. They have no idea what to do with it, and they get stuck or they give up. And that's the pattern that I see over and over and over again. We're going to follow these rules. We're not sure what's going to happen. We don't have a strategy. We meet resistance. We don't know what to do with it. And we either spin our wheels and stay in this advanced beginner state forever, or we give up and we start writing articles about why Scrum didn't work. We start writing articles about why TDD is a mistake. And I don't think that helps. And so I feel like part of what I want to do now is to help people at that critical point, the point just before they're ready to give up. I hope they'll find me, and together we can figure out, what are you really trying to do? Which tools in the toolbox will really be helpful? And how do you make progress from here?
Are there any first steps that apply to all of the companies, or is everything depending on the case?
I don't know about companies. So one of the things that's really changed for me over the last 10 years is I've really shifted my focus away from, I used to think that it was my duty to fix companies. I used to think that it was my duty to fix organizations, that that's what I was here to do. And in the last 10 years or so, I've really shifted my focus to helping individual people. And so now a lot of what I do is sort of accept that companies are strange places. They have constraints that make it very difficult for them to behave in a sensible way. It's very easy for companies to do what we individuals think of as the wrong thing, or strange things, make strange decisions, have weird policies. And I feel like what I want to do is to help people navigate that world and figure out how they can make contributions in that environment where some of the fundamental assumptions just don't match our values. I mean, I'm not here to fix capitalism. I'm not here to fix the global economy. And at some point, that's kind of what it would take to fix companies. So I would much rather spend time working with individuals and helping them cope, helping them figure out what it is that they actually can do, what areas of influence they actually have, and which kinds of tools will be helpful for them. And in that regard, oddly enough, one of the places that's one of the recurring patterns there is helping people make peace with the situation the way it is without giving up. I think there's this odd assumption baked into many of our cultures. I don't know how widespread it is. I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't be sure. But a lot of the people that I talk to, and certainly in North America and in most of Europe, they're taught to believe that if they accept the situation the way it is, then they're giving up. They don't care, and they feel like that's abdicating their responsibility. They feel this responsibility to try to improve things around them. And they think that the only way to improve things around them is to yell at the people around them, to blame them for how things are, and that will fire everyone up and motivate them to make changes. And one of the things what that tends to leave them with is this very hollow feeling of, if I don't fix everything, then I haven't done anything. And I don't know about you, but I've now spent a couple of decades having it pounded into my head that most of the time, for most people, not much changes. But the little things that we can do can make a big difference. They can radically change our experience of what it's like at our job. But there's a lot of stuff that's probably not going to change, because we're not going to fix the global economy. We're not going to replace capitalism with something else, even if that were a good idea. There's lots of big systemic change we can't make. So if we're going to let that stop us from trying to do anything, then we're going to have a bad time. And that's really what I try to do. I am often saying to people just this phrase: accepting the way things are doesn't mean giving up. You can accept the way things are and still want to improve them. But there's a big difference in feeling and in action between wanting to improve things while accepting things the way they are, and walking around blaming everyone for being wrong, telling everyone they're wrong, telling everyone that they are, that they're doing it wrong, that they're living wrong, that they're whatever it is. Because that tends to lead to a kind of over-responsibility. That tends to lead to people who have an overinflated sense of what they can change, and leads them to be frustrated and to feel like, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. I have no idea what I'm doing with my career. Nothing is ever going to change. Therefore, I should just give up. And that is a path to burnout, depression. Let's not go there. Let's find out what's happening, give you some better tools to help you feel like you're making some kind of progress before it gets to that point. And that's, I never expected to be here. When I was first reading about extreme programming and agile software development in the early 2000s, I did not expect to become a kind of not quite therapist. It wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't what I expected to do. I didn't expect to learn this much about psychology, and ultimately that's what I'm doing, is I'm helping people make better sense of what they're feeling, and to help protect themselves against their own impulse to take too much responsibility for what's going on around them. And that doesn't sound very software development-y. But, programming is the easy part. Practice TDD, do some refactoring, learn a few tools, do that for, 10, 20,000 hours, and boom, you're done. That's what I meant. I mean, the hard part is, how do you help someone who has spent decades feeling like they're responsible for everything that happens around them? How do you help someone who has never learned to make peace with the crappy things that are going on around them? And not how do you beat their optimism out of them. But how do you help them cope? Oh, you just have to learn to let it go. Okay, cool. Great story, bro. How do you let things go? How does that work? And that's really part of what I do. So, I spend a lot more time helping people work through their emotions than I do helping them refactor code. But sometimes we also get a chance to just sit down and relax and refactor code together, and it's fun.
That's the easy part.
Exactly. And that's, we genuinely, we retreat to, oh, here's an area where I can shut all those complications out for a while. And it's just us and the computer. It's just us and our own minds. It's just us and our own curiosity about how to organize this code better so that I have a better chance of delivering this feature sooner to the person who is standing there, again, arms crossed, tapping their toes, impatiently waiting. And wouldn't it also be amazing if I could start to see what they're doing as a normal part of their job and not a thing that's designed to make my life difficult? Mm-hmm. If you don't have an impatient customer, you don't have a business. If you don't have at least one impatient customer out there, then there's no reason for you to build that next feature. Nobody's waiting for it. Nobody cares. Then you have a hobby, not a business. And these are the kinds of things that we talk about. And all the code stuff, all the evolutionary design, the ruthless simplicity, the frequent replanning, all that helps us execute on our plans better. But what has really been missing is, like, what's wrong with our plans? What's wrong with our strategies? What do we need to change? How do we even know we're on the right track? How do we even know that this is a direction worth going in? That's where the difficult part is. Once we have that sort of figured out a little bit, I'd like to get to the point where the actual building the software to move in that direction is exactly the right kind of boring. The kind of boring where there are no fires to fight and we just get it done. And it's almost relaxing.
You talk about building the habits that can help programmers deliver features faster. What are those? What are those? They're, of course, depending on the context and everything, but
yes.
Just in general, what can anyone listening to this today take as an actionable tip to improve their habits?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the simplest things, and it's hilarious, and I always feel stupid when I tell people this, and yet it's one of the things that people routinely tell me provides the most value. Write things down. Now, obviously, if I just say write things down, that's one of those things that's true but useless. So, okay, let's make it sound more complicated so that programmers will actually do it. So, for example, when I'm working, I always have these slips of scrap paper because, unfortunately, I produce a bunch of paper for reasons that aren't important. I always have a pen with me. And when I'm working, what I'm constantly battling is I'm having difficulty focusing, right? Focusing, narrowing concentration. I have habits that let me focus on one thing at a time, but focus itself is always a struggle. Whether you have ADHD or not, I don't think I do, but I might. It's very easy to be distracted. Everyone's experienced the feeling of being distracted. And one of the things that tends to help deal with distractions is simply to write things down to get them out of your head. Anyone who's read the book Getting Things Done is familiar with this phrase. David Allen's known for it. Your head is for having ideas, not holding them, which is one nice pithy way of saying it. Another thing is just this phrase of getting things out of your head. And while I'm working, if a thought comes to my mind, especially if it's the kind of thought, oh, here's a thing I might need to do later, then I built the habit of just writing it down. And my objective here is not to create this long to-do list of things. My objective here is to safely forget. And safely forget is one of those things that's a really powerful trick that still I'm surprised at the number of people who haven't encountered it yet. That one of the most amazing things you can do to improve your focus is to allow yourself to safely forget. And one of the ways that you can safely forget is to write these things down as they come up. And it kind of works like this. I write this thing down. It's now out of my head. I don't have to think about it anymore. If it keeps coming back, fine. I might need to write the same thing down 2 or 3 times. And again, they can be tests that I think I want to write, refactorings that I think I want to do, tasks that I think I need to do later, stuff that has nothing to do with job. It's like, remember to pick this thing up at the store. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But there are things that will distract me from from the task I'd like to focus on right now. And when I write them down, it doesn't seem like anything's happening. I write them down, and then at some point, I just do them. It doesn't seem like a very powerful habit until the first time this happens. And this was when I really became sold on it. I was practicing this habit because I read it in a book. It seemed like an easy thing to try. And then I looked at my list. I thought I got to the end of a task. I'm like, okay, that's done. Excellent. Fantastic. That was like 3 hours of hard work. I felt a bit tired. Oh, I can't wait to take a break. And then I looked at my list and I saw one thing on my list. And I reacted to that by saying, oh, right. I almost forgot. So then I did that little task. And then I was really done, push, have the little celebration, walk away, have a break. And what I really recognized, what I noticed in that moment was not I almost forgot. I actually forgot. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I didn't have to worry about that because I wrote it down. I didn't have to waste any energy on that task. By writing it down like 2 hours before, I allowed myself to safely forget it, which meant that I didn't have to carry that with me while I was doing my work. The hard part of that is measuring how much more quickly I went while I was doing my task because I was able to focus more completely, concentrate more narrowly. But I know it felt good. Partly it felt good while I was doing the task that I could just do that and not worry. And as distractions came to my head, I wrote them down. When I saw that item and went, oh yeah, I still have to do that, there was part of me that was a little bit annoyed because I thought I was done, but I wasn't really. And when I thought about it some more over the break, I realized, wow, I didn't have to carry that with me. I felt lighter while I was doing the work. And then I was immediately hooked. For me, that was what sold me. What made me think, this is something that's not just some productivity trick that some cynical huckster is trying to sell us. This is an example of what happens when I safely forget. That when you safely forget, it's like taking rocks out of your backpack while you're hiking. You go more quickly, more relaxed. I want to edit that out. Don't say quickly. Quickly is not important. What matters is going more easily, more relaxed. You get done sooner. You put in less effort. It requires less energy. And at the same time, if you're worried that programmers are really good at knowing what they have to do, but not really good at knowing what they might have to do. And that's part of the reason that we have trouble estimating and planning is because we don't foresee the unplanned work we need to do. That's why it's unplanned. This is a way of starting to correct that habit as well. A way of making it more obvious the things that you might need to do and protecting against the fact that once you start getting to actually doing the task, you might forget that there are 3 things in the meeting you didn't mention that you're actually going to have to do. And at some point you're going to go, oh, right, I have to do this as well. Oh, right, I have to do this as well. And instead of trying to carry it in your head, which slows you down, makes you feel heavier, makes you feel less able to do the work that you're doing, increases the number of mistakes you make, it delays success. By just writing them down, you can safely forget them. And when you think you're done, you'll look at your list and say, oh, right, I still need to do this, this, and this. And you'll have 4 seconds of annoyance where you say, I thought I was done, but I'm not. And then it'll feel like, oh, that's cool. Here are 3 things that I knew I needed to do. I wasn't worried about them. I can do them now, and then I'll be done. And again, it's so dumb. I remember I spent time working with Spotify, about 4 years off and on working with Spotify, mostly in their Stockholm office. And, they're well known for using a lot of the things that we call agile practices pretty extensively. They've hired a whole bunch of consultants. Some of my Some of my best friends have worked with Spotify and taught them a lot of stuff. And so when you walk in there, it kind of looks like they're doing it right. And yet one of the impacts that I had on one of the teams there that surprised me the most, but that they told me was important, was, they had their big visible chart, not quite Kanban board, but sort of in that neighborhood, so that they could visualize the flow of work. They did it like you would see in the books. It seemed to be helping them. But I noticed that during their daily stand-up meetings, they were having trouble keeping track of all the good ideas that were going back and forth. You had 4 or 5 or 6 people in a circle, helping each other out and shouting interesting things and saying things like, that reminds me, we also need to do this. Or for that task, we really need to make sure we do this. Or as part of that task, maybe we should do this as well. That would be a good time. And what I noticed was they were shouting all these pieces of information that were critical to success. And then they were just falling to the floor in the middle. And one day I just said, hey, folks, you know what might be helpful? Let's add a part of the board, because they were using these huge whiteboards. Let's add a part of the board and call it the inbox. And the idea is that as these things come up during your daily stand-up, somebody should stand there with a bunch of sticky notes. And as they hear these ideas coming through, they should just write them down on a sticky note and put them in the inbox. That might be tasks, additional tasks they need to do. It might be discussions they need to have. It might be questions they need answered. And they can either just put it in the inbox or directly attach the tasks that they're working on, so that they don't have all these really good ideas and then forget them, and then nothing happens. And it seems like an obvious suggestion to me. And it's just another version of write things down. I mean, it's the writing down the distractions as they come up, but at the level of a group. And I went back, I visited them like a month later, and they said that was the single biggest improvement that they'd had to the way they work. That all of a sudden there were a bunch of things that used to sneak up on them that didn't anymore. And there was a part of me that felt kind of a little sad. Like, this is such an obvious thing. How are you not doing this before? And this was what it really took to help you go from here to here, because you weren't forgetting, you were forgetting safely. You were allowing things to happen. You were creating a habit which stopped you from forgetting in an unsafe way, that you were forgetting safely. Now I don't have to think about those things. At the end of the stand-up meeting, someone goes and looks at the inbox and figures out what to do with those tasks. That's like right out of the Getting Things Done handbook. It's so obvious. Everyone obviously already knows this, except apparently they don't. And this is not a programming trick. This is literally just if you can forget safely, then you will better be able to focus on what you're doing. And it'll be easier for you to say things out loud, to have ideas when you trust that you're going to be able to forget them safely and do them later. If I just see that everybody around me never listens to my ideas, eventually I will shut up. But if I see that things actually happen, because we have a system for remembering them, for doing them later, then I'm actually going to speak up when I have a good idea and think about how much better things get. It's such an enabler, and in a good way. And yet, I'm shocked at how many groups react to this like I've blown their mind, react to them like I'm a genius, and all I'm doing is telling them to write things down. It's absolutely amazing to me. But the good news is there's an easy place to help. I can help them right away.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better.
I guess the things that seem easy at first glance are the hardest ones and the most, like, the easiest to overlook. And then the things that seem hard, like the programming and architecture and everything we need to learn on the technical side, it feels difficult. And it's where everyone puts their focus because this is the most difficult part.
Either because it's the most difficult or because it's the most intricate, like it's complicated. There's lots of parts. Or it's the thing that I think is going to make me valuable. That what I'm valuable for is my ability to produce code. Right. And there's a complex web of reasons why people believe that. And part of what I do is to help them see that that's actually not the most valuable thing they can do. I mean, it's, one of the things that I really loved about extreme programming was this idea of figuring out all the things that we shouldn't do and stop doing them. And one of the ideas from the early days was like writing the code is the one step we can't get rid of. That's ultimately, that's the thing that we have to do. And all the other parts of our defined processes, our policies, our habits, our rituals should only be there in support of writing the code. And that's where we got the idea of, taking a lean approach, of ruthless simplicity, of figuring out what are the smallest, simplest rituals that could possibly support us, because really all we're trying to do is to write that code better, more safely, to make it work better. That's where the whole working code over comprehensive documentation came from. But that you can be forgiven for believing that as a result of that, writing code is the thing that makes you the most valuable. I don't think it is. I think what makes you so much more valuable is taking seriously all that other stuff, is figuring out what not to do, then not doing it. Being willing to risk not doing something that everybody else is doing. And not even in a willpower, I have courage kind of way, but like, let's figure out really which things are genuinely not necessary, whether that means using theory of constraints to help us find bottlenecks and saying, well, that thing is not near the bottleneck, therefore we don't have to do it. Like, it doesn't matter how slowly that goes. It's not the bottleneck. This is all that really matters. Those are the things that I think are so much more valuable and can lead us towards delivering features sooner, that clear the path so that when we actually do sit down to write code, that part doesn't go any more smoothly, but the path between writing code and seeing it in a customer's hands, seeing a user using it, getting feedback from people about whether we're on the right track, that gap gets smaller and smaller over time. So that when we are stuck battling with some stupid third-party library that doesn't work the way anybody thought we did, we can spend our time focusing on that and figuring out how to make that work, instead of also trying to worry about, how am I going to deploy this? How am I going to get approval? Who is going to care about this? How are we going to know that this feature is actually what the customer wanted? All that kind of stuff.
I want to dig into this a bit deeper on group level. So
Sure.
Going from product and planning to actual delivery, focusing on the value. And you talk about value-driven development or something in that context. How do we start, and how do we create a culture where the whole team has the same understanding and the same, how do we communicate things to programmers as well, in terms of, okay, this is what creates most value, so that in terms of code they can decide whether they need to focus on refactoring, or maybe they need to leave some intentional tech debt, planning to come back to it later. This value thing from start to end in terms of a group setting.
Yeah. One of the real stumbling blocks to this work is that different people have different ideas about what constitutes value, what kind of value. I mean, the phrase business value just creates all kinds of confusion, not because there's a problem with the phrase, but because so many people cling to this notion that there is an objective way to measure value, and there simply isn't. And this is not a problem to solve, right? There are wonderful books out there, such as How to Measure Anything, which are trying to give us tools to be able to take these nebulous concepts and wrap our arms around them in some way so that we can talk about them more effectively. And that's wonderful. But I worry sometimes that it gives some people the impression that there's an objective concept of value out there somewhere, and if we just wander through the jungle long enough with a big enough scythe to get the grass out of the way, we'll find it. And I just don't think that's true. We're left with people who are struggling mightily to solve a problem that isn't a problem. It's just a reality to accept. Different people have different ideas about what value means, which means if we want to turn this group into a team, one of the things that we need to do is to agree on what kind of value we're going to focus on together. And it's not about convincing people that you're right and they're wrong. It's not about finding the one source of truth. It's enough just to agree. If you're going to be wrong together. And if you are wrong together, whatever that means, well, I shouldn't say that. What that often means is there's somebody with lots and lots of an influence or authority who has a different idea to you. Okay, great. Now you've identified somebody else you need to agree with. That's all that means. It doesn't mean you're wrong, they're right. It just means here is a person with whom we need to agree. And we didn't involve them in the process the first time. And I think that's one big obstacle. Like I said, that people, they operate under this delusion that there's an objective measure of value. And if they could just figure out what that is, then everything would be better. And this is where, tactics such as OKRs give people a false sense of security. Not that there's anything wrong with the idea of an OKR. It's when we believe a little bit too much in the objective part that we get into trouble. That value is personal. It's that simple. Value is personal. And value is an ongoing negotiation among people. And therefore, all the tricks from all the books about writing software and delivering features sooner are not going to help you here if you're not prepared to engage with the idea that value is an ongoing negotiation among people. And that one of the possible outcomes of that could be that you, our product owner, or you, our director of marketing, whoever you are, if you have sufficient authority or influence within the organization, in a certain sense, what you say goes. And we either need to be prepared to do that or not. Now, we might think that you are making a mistake. We might think that you are chasing after the wrong kind of value, in which case we need to engage with you and discuss that and argue that and debate it. We're trying to build agreement about what kind of value we, now including you and us, are going to go after together. And again, that's not a problem to solve. That's a reality to accept. So that's the first part. Now, one of the consequences of that is many groups, when they encounter this idea, they see it as a huge roadblock because they picture the person in their mind that they have to agree with, and they know that that's not going to be easy. Either because they know that they have very different ideas about what value is important, or because that person works in another building, in another city, on another continent, and they don't get to talk to them very frequently. So they see this big obstacle to aligning on value, to agreeing on value. And from there they say, well, therefore there's nothing for us to do. Nothing we do matters. They have this nihilistic crisis, and everybody just sits there slumped in their chairs, wondering what they're going to do with the rest of their day. So, okay, if we're there, what do we do? And that's where a whole bunch of these ideas from extreme programming, from agile software development become helpful, not because they are going to make the results better, but because they're going to provide options. So when I teach value-driven product development, for example, some other people know this by other phrases. I know Alistair Coburn calls it elephant carpaccio, which is, I think, good marketing on his part. I tried to call it product sashimi 20 years ago, but nobody wanted to buy it. That's fine. The idea of slicing features thinly and delivering thin slices and then using those thin slices, piling them on top of each other to try to figure out where's the 20% of effort that provides 80% of the value, and then let's just do that. Right? That's the a basic summary of incremental feature delivery. And the delivery part is actually, again, really easy. Continuous build pipelines, evolutionary design, 3 to 7 years, 10 to 20,000 hours of practice. We're done, fine. But the interesting part is then, like, how do we slice features into smaller slices that balance enough that we care about it and small enough that we can get it done relatively soon. Now, when we learn this technique as programmers, or as, let's call them product owners, but I really mean specifically the person who was tapped on the shoulder and told on Monday, you're going to be a product owner now. There are like senior business analysts who do all the really hard thinking, and your job is to translate that into language that the geeks understand. Those people, especially, when they're practicing these techniques, they're probably not going to be able to deliver features any sooner than they were before, because the impatient customer, who's maybe a senior business analyst or some other kind of subject matter expert, insists that until we get all of it, none of it matters. They're still insisting on getting 50 kilograms of software, and that 10 kilograms will never be useful. When we practice slicing those features, what we're doing is providing options. We're providing options to the decision makers so that they, at some point, can decide, you know what, we actually don't need 50 kilograms of this feature. 10 kilograms would be enough. What are the most valuable 10 kilograms that you can give me? Or when we scream at them, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter how much you threat, we can't get it done in 3 weeks. It's going to take 3 months. And they say, but I need to have it in 3 weeks. Okay, well, what can I get in 3 weeks? Us practicing those techniques don't necessarily help us if the people making the decisions about what to build are going to cling to their old ideas about what's valuable and how much of it they need to make a dent or to be useful. But what we can do is to prepare ourselves, give them options so that when things really get bad and they start to feel desperate and they are forced to make tough decisions, we can soften the landing for them. We can say, well, from what we understand, like, this 25% of the feature provides 70% of the value. That's kind of how it looks to us. What do you think? Those conversations are the beginning of agreeing on what's valuable. And it's unfortunate that it takes a crisis to get to the point where we actually have those conversations. But the good news is, once we start having those conversations, they tend to continue. And so when we practice acceptance test-driven development, or story slicing, story splitting, features, or whatever you want to call it, when we practice this thing, we are providing options to the rest of the organization so that they can execute on any strategy they want about how to deliver features sooner. Do they want to deliver interim features sooner and get feedback from the live market, even though they expect to deliver all 50 kilograms of this feature? Maybe if we deploy the first 10 kilograms, we'll get some interesting feedback, and that will tell us to deliver the next 5 kilograms, the next 5 kilograms, and so on. Or there are 7 major feature areas. Let's deliver the smallest thing from all 7 areas to make one cohesive product that does almost nothing and see what happens. Or let's focus our energy on this area, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take. Let's just keep incrementally delivering features in this area until somebody says it's enough, and then we can shift focus. I'm not there at that point to try to make those decisions, and I'm not there to try to convince them how to make those decisions. What I'm doing when I'm doing test-driven development, story splitting, acceptance test-driven development, ruthlessly deploying every day or every 10 minutes, whatever it is that you do, what I'm doing is I'm trying to provide them options. I'm trying to help them have as much freedom as possible to decide. And here's the trick. Even when they're not using that freedom, if I practice giving them that freedom, eventually they might take advantage of it. Once they start taking advantage of it, they kind of get addicted to it in a good way. They start to notice that this is really helpful, and they become an active participant in that. But they're almost never going to get there if we don't practice first. If we don't actually get good at that, if we just tell them that this is what we want to do, but we're not very good at it yet, Everybody gets frustrated. But if we just quietly get good at that, then it opens up the possibility that when they hit a crisis point and they ask us what they think is an impossible question, we can just say, oh yeah, we can do that, no problem. You need a tiny version of that feature? We were going to do it that way anyway. All you're doing is telling us to stop on Tuesday instead of waiting until Friday. We can do that, no problem. And so that's one of the places I think where groups can start, is that they can start practicing, whether it's refactoring, story splitting, delivering more frequent, like deploying more frequently, testing earlier in their development lifecycle, any of those things that sort of move generally in the direction of what extreme programming suggested. They're preparing themselves for when somebody asks them to do something that they think is difficult, but isn't difficult for us because we've been practicing for 3 months, 6 months, a year. So if I hang my identity on whether they're taking advantage of my good work, I'm probably going to start crying. But if I can frame it as we're doing good work for ourselves and each other because it's easier, it's less stressful, we're providing them with more options, whether they want them or not, because we suspect at some point in the future they are, in fact, going to want to take advantage of those options, then we can feel a lot better about what we're doing, and we will volunteer to do more of it. We will volunteer to do it better. We will volunteer to then figure out all the little habits that will help us. So whether that's writing things down while we're writing code, writing the tests first so that we stop writing more code than we need, refactoring more often so that when I reopen that part of the code, I'm less likely to vomit in my mouth about how bad the design is, or any of those things. I think a lot of groups get stuck with the big question: how in the world are we going to align on value? And use that as kind of a reason to give up. But there are a bunch of things that you can do inside the group to prepare for what happens when all of a sudden those bigger conversations have to happen. And in the meantime, maybe there's somebody in the group who is interested in the psychology aspect of our work and who wants to try to figure out what are they really asking for, and what is the question behind the question? What would they do if they got it? Why is this so important to them? Why is there such a big gap between what they think is valuable and what we think is valuable? Where is all that coming from? If there's somebody in the group who happens to be naturally interested in those questions, then there's room for them to become a leader. There's room for them to engage those questions to shield the rest of the group so that the rest of the group can stick with the easy part of figuring out how to set up the continuous delivery pipelines and how much refactoring is too much and which tests do they really need to write and how can they slice this feature even more thinly. That they get to practice those things while somebody is engaged in the big cultural questions. How do we create these conversations? How do we, how do we invite people to the table where they're actually willing to come? How do we make it worth their while? How do we even have those conversations? How do we handle it when those conversations start getting heated? What happens when we start yelling at each other? What happens when somebody starts crying? These are all difficult questions. And I think that one place where groups have struggled is they let those big questions shut them down. When in the meantime, there's still a bunch of things that they can practice, that they can do on their own, which will allow them to be better prepared for when they actually do have agreement with the senior VP of marketing or with the third line senior business analyst about which features they should be trying to build. And so, for the folks out there who identify as primarily technical, programmers, testers, whatever you are, we're the ones who actually make the bits do the right thing. Do it for yourself. These ideas that can help you with your habits, writing things down, writing tests earlier, refactoring more often, making your design decisions easier to change, identifying less with the design decisions you're making. You are not your design. Figuring out how to slice features thinner and thinner and thinner, whether they asked you to or not. That those techniques, it's enough for you to do them for you so that you can build muscle. And then when it comes time to actually try to deliver sooner, for a customer who desperately wants you to do it, you'll be in a better position to do it. And in the
I
meantime,
love it.
I hope there's at least one person in the group who wants to handle the relationship part, because that is going to be important.
It all makes a full circle right now. So when you started, you need to accept the things that you can change immediately, the frustrations and everything of wanting to adjust the culture or start extreme programming or whatever you want to do. It feels overwhelming because it's
Yes.
too big of a change. But then on the other side, if you do it on your own on the side without thinking about whether someone else will understand it or need it or want to use what you're doing, then yes, it makes total sense. And then at some point it will resonate with others and it will likely change a lot within the culture.
Or not. And that's okay. That's not your responsibility, right? You're not there to fix the company.
Right.
But if you are genuinely doing those things because you believe it's going to give them more options, you're trying to give them something. And they might never take advantage of it, and that's okay. The worst thing that happens is you're better ready for the next employer. Or that the work that you're doing for each other is more enjoyable. And you will notice that you actually are delivering things sooner. You actually are doing things more easily with less effort. And dare I even say it, some of it will actually go faster. The one really strange thing that seems to happen is that it always feels slow while you're doing it, and yet it always gets done earlier than it used to be. And that's one of those paradoxical things that we kind of just have to get used to. The idea that it feels slow while we're doing it, and yet we're done sooner than we used to be. Or when we're done, it really is done. I don't have to go back and do it again. We're not fixing defects. We're not figuring out how to actually, oh, we were wrong about what we were trying to build. Let's do it differently this time. It feels slow while it's happening, and yet it's when it's done, and we seem to be done with it earlier than we used to be. Great. That's probably what they want.
I think this is an excellent way to wrap up the conversation. Is there anything else you want to add or missed?
Um, no, I mean, there's not really. There's so much to talk about, and in fact, one of the things that I do, like I said earlier, I've really adapted to trying to help individuals instead of companies. That doesn't mean I don't help companies. I still do. Please come and ask me for help. But I help companies in a much different way than I used to. But one of the things that I do that is work that I really enjoy and work that we really find is quite effective is I run a sort of micro consulting, mentoring, training, coaching group that I call the JBrains Experience because it's a fun name. And it is a group where we get together for office hours once a week. We have an ongoing chat workspace where we just talk about things as they come up. People can ask questions and get answers. We have a nice discussion forum, especially when we want to talk about code. It's usually easier to paste code samples into a forum than into chat where they disappear and they're hard to read. And a lot of the people who join the group are there to get questions about, how do I have better influence over the people around me? They're practicing their own coaching skills or their own consulting skills, in addition to how do I test this? How do I refactor this? How do I know that this much refactoring is enough, and so on. And so if you think that might be interesting, it's not free, but it's very valuable. Please go to experience.jbrains.ca or just do a web search for JBrains Experience and see if it's something that might help you. We have people who are asking questions like, I think I might want to be a freelancer now. How do I get started? Or I'm trying to be a coach. What kind of coaching skills should I try to develop? All the way to, I have this weird, I tried building this thing with test-driven development and the design looks weird. What did I do wrong? We talk about a little bit of everything. So if you would like that kind of support, it's a little bit like hiring me as a coach, but fractionally, just as much of me as you need without having to have a huge budget. You'd be surprised. It's less expensive than you think.
Thank you, JV, once again. I will add a link to your website in the description of the episode so everyone can access it.
great. Thanks very much. And I really appreciate the invitation, the chance to talk about this stuff. And good luck out there, folks. Don't worry. It will get better.
Thank you.